So, let's conclude the first part, and let's even try to finish our program a bit earlier. We have an interesting speaker today to whom we can pose questions. You have been, from the very beginning in this event, might have drawn your own conclusions, so I'm going to draw my own conclusion of Dr. Barquino's speech. He said that the future of OPEC Plus seems to have a good future, brilliant future, it's working well, and it's focused mainly on the balance between supply and demand, looking carefully at stocks. We have seen a forecast carried out by OPEC where we can see that these famous peaks are not always seen, and every time an analysis is carried out, we might forget that demand can be higher than what one expects in the beginning, and then prices is another important factor, and prices should never go above a certain limit. So, and now, Rafael, maybe you could talk about geopolitics. As we can have seen in the survey, it seems that geopolitics still will be an important factor in the near future. Yeah, but I was surprised that Barquino's speech did not include geopolitics. After that, we have had another the first roundtable, where there was a lot of talk about geopolitics, and the last one was on energy transition. The last roundtable was on energy transition. But of course, if we listen to Barquino's speech, taking into account that the U.S. administration is pressing, together with the EU, with sanctions on Russia, that sanctions have been adopted, which are not sanctions like those of Obama that were proportional maybe and were limited to some degrees, but these are really hard sanctions against Iran. And at the same time, there's a commercial battle between the US and China, which also has an impact on the energy sector regarding how China carries out imports, for instance, gas imports. Well, in that case, we can see that the context is what Emilio Lama de Espinosa called as a geopolitical worsening situation of the geopolitical factors. And we talked about the Middle East and North Africa in the first roundtable. And this is a region that we've always considered as an unstable region, difficult to predict what's going to happen there. Nevertheless, it still is a key region, and very interesting things have happened there. Barquindo talked about such interesting things, such as having gas and oil for quite a while. And I think that Barquindo does not value enough the continuous fall of the cost of renewables. He does not take sufficiently into account the importance of what we are witnessing. That is, that companies and governments, national, regional, the EU, and the cities are driving measures against climate change. But also companies are doing that. They're also playing an important role there, and the industry. And there's a key element that was brought about earlier. Transports. If transports are in the heart of energy consumption, and if transports are based on a non-efficient idea of consumption, we will continue to have our current problems. Another very important we have learned from Barquino's speech is that hybrid vehicles are conventional vehicles, which I actually did not know. But so far, the reality is that we have returned to the same prices as 4 years ago. This geopolitical acceleration exists alongside an important push towards energy transition. Talking about this region, I think Gonzalo said something very interesting regarding this region when he said that Algeria is showing signs of progressing towards an energy transition. There are positive signs, for instance, that Naturia has managed to renew its contracts. That's very important. And also that by the elections next year, we will probably not see substantial changes. And something that's going on in Algeria and also in other producer countries is that they do not really have important incentives to advance in the path of renewables. Although we are seeing in some countries of the Arabian Gulf that there is some interest in renewables and in efficiency and also in freeing production capacities in order to be able to improve their exports, and these are all very interesting.
Por ejemplo, y es una muestra.
Another very interesting thing which attracted my attention is that geopolitics is not a fixed picture. It is dynamic. I think it was David who said that. Funnily, no, it was Andre who said this. The relationship between Iran and Turkey, being both countries, opposite countries, regarding the conflict with Syria, the conflict of Syria, which seems to be the central subject in that region. Nevertheless, despite them being enemies, so to speak, regarding Syria, there are affinities between the two countries nevertheless, and that is what is allowing their relationship to be good. Another very important element that was raised, and I think it was David who talked about this, is that China, contrary to what we could think, is not really a reliable alternative for Iran. Iran's experiences with China and during the previous sanctions and with China invading their market with low-quality companies. China has been intrusive, has been invasive, has been aggressive, and therefore China is not a reliable partner for Iran. And some questions raised here. Iran, in order to be able to compensate the fall of its exports, will it be able to turn to mechanisms as barter? Would that work currently? Is Iran going to be able to change oil for other products? Like in the previous government, there was this mechanism for Asian countries that the EU is also seeking in order to be able to maintain a certain degree of imports to Iran. Is there going to be a greater degree of commercial creativity? That is also another important issue. Some time ago I was in Argentina, and I learned there that Argentina is importing soy. Imagine, it's one of the 3 biggest soy producers, and Argentina has started to import soybeans from the States in order to channel it to their domestic market, and they are exporting their own soybeans to China. So these are quite interesting configurations, quite interesting measures that are being adopted, and we are going to see more of that in the future. And finally, the last roundtable. What Fernando Radella said really attracted my attention. I think that what he said, that our markets are designed around fossil fuel energies, that's also an interesting element to take into account. So really our markets are not designed around renewables or clean energies or an energy transition. Nevertheless, all of this is changing. And we are witnessing this change right now. And if we have to tell what the future will look like. I know there's going to be a drive for decarbonization from the governments, from the society, from the companies. Societies will also be very involved in that decarbonization process. Sanchez Galan was interviewed in a national newspaper, and he said that fighting climate change is a moral obligation and also a business opportunity. So companies are really interested in this, and policies support their interest in this change.
Los marcos jurídicos endureciéndose también esos marcos.
In this change, and then we're also seeing these changes in legal frameworks regarding transparency, and this is leading to investors not being interested in making investments in carbon-based economies anymore, and there's a shift in the mindset in all the dimensions. Now, regarding Latin America, we've heard about Mexico, and in the Paris Agreement there were some Latin American, in the Paris meeting there were some Latin American participants who showed very interesting examples. In some cases, some Spanish companies are also taking part, and this is where I would like to conclude my speech. Spain's capacity to create a climate diplomacy in order to be able to exert a soft power in Latin America, that's interesting for us. The brand of Spain would include a Spain that has its own local brands, but a Spain that has become a global player. Now, thank you very much. And now, please, we need a microphone for those who have questions. Ana Sevilla from ILEC has a question. Within those regional energy transitions, which do you think is the role that the electricity sector should play in the EU? Thank you very much. The Paris Agreement is leading to a decarbonized landscape with over 30 years with the aim to reduce the temperature rise to 2 degrees centigrade. In this respect, creating a prosperous economy based on a reliable energy supply, which is not reliable on coal, there has to be a decarbonized electrical mix, and also, as we have heard this morning, it is very important to decarbonize the rest of the sectors too. So, in this sense, we have before us a deep energy transition, which we think will be possible to implement only if electricity becomes a key element of this strategy. The EU is leading this shift and this transformation process. Euroelectric, as you know, is the European Association of the Electricity Industrial, and they have developed some electricity strategies. There are 3 scenarios. 1, decarbonization by 80%, as agreed in the Paris Agreement and as agreed with the EU's commitments, and another scenario where there's a 90% reduction, and a third scenario where there's a 95% reduction, which would mean in practically decarbonizing completely the economy. In these 3 scenarios, we have seen that electrification is really important. Every sector has to be electrified. Otherwise, we will not reach our goals. These 3 sectors that also Ferran talked about are absolutely key. Transportation, buildings, and also industry are the 3 main elements. Now, transportation. 1/4 of emissions in Europe come from the transportation sector. Only 1% there is decarbonized, and this represents, this is mainly the railway sector. And we have heard about different targets, ambitious targets, but what we know for sure is that within Europe, state members have different ambitions and different targets, but there are already some success stories, for instance, regarding electrical mobility. For instance, in Norway, more than half of the vehicles that are registered are either electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. So that is a reality already. Now, regarding buildings, 1/3 already is electrified. And here we also have very competitive solutions, economic solutions regarding electrification for heating, for kitchens, also stoves. And in new buildings, we could start changing from more polluting heating systems to cleaner heating systems. Now, regarding industry, David gave a very good overview regarding industry. There is a diversity within the industry, and there we have to really look at the wide range of solutions we have there regarding each sector, but we always have to take into account the competitiveness of the industry. Now, regardless of the emission scenario, we are looking at what really is a fact is that electrification in the final use of energy should represent 46% as compared to the current 20%. Now, all of this has to be taken into account without forgetting energy efficiency, and it is here where electrification is absolutely key, because nevertheless, even if demand of electricity is raising, the global demand for electricity is going down. So we can find room for a better energy efficiency there. And last but not least, I would like to say that, as has very correctly been said, the process of decarbonization and electrification goes through the introduction of renewables, for which we need a very efficient distribution grid in order to be able to integrate also consumers, who really have to play a very important role in this new strategy. Now, the second question is for Luis Travesero. Last year, CEPSA celebrated 30 years in Algeria. What has been your experience like, and what experiences is Algeria offering for the future? Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Yes, 30 years in Algeria already. Last year we met those 30 years. We reached those 30 years, and it is difficult to know CEPSA's history if you are not familiar with CEPSA's history in Algeria. There we started exploring successfully fields there, and part of our success comes precisely from Algeria. So we found some fields and we put on place some infrastructure projects and upstream projects, also roads and pipes, gas pipes and oil pipes, and operating on those fields where we have produced more than over 2 billion barrels, and with very high returns regarding what the industry is. But the most important factor during these 30 years has been the fact that we have been able to carry out very good relationships with Sona Terade. For us, our relationship has been more interesting, more important than our economic interests. So I think that precisely our relationship with Sonatrach has been probably the most eminent element of our 30 years in Algeria. Now, talking about energy transition, I think we're talking about a global long-term story. It is a long-term story, and I would like to highlight that, because over the next 10-15 years or even more, according to some scenarios, the presence of hydrocarbons and fossil fuels will still be important, and we need responsible and efficient companies that are able to tackle and to work with fossil fuels in a responsible manner. We have been carrying out analyses and forecasts, and last year we published what we call the CEPSA Outlook, which is a forecast and is an analysis on markets and energy markets and their behavior in the future. Although this publication was published some months ago already, and nevertheless I would encourage you to read it, and I think it is quite easy to read, and there's an interactive format where you can pose questions and will receive answers. in this electronic version, but now our 2030 vision, we really are convinced that energy transition is very important, and I think that as an energy company, we have to accompany our customers and we have to meet the demands of our customers. And we are trying to imagine where our company will be by 2030, and we are deeply convinced that we are doing certain things very well and have to base our work on that. What are we doing well? Well, the excellence of our operations. Secondly, our adaptation capacity, ability, and thirdly, our awareness regarding security of people, and for the safety of the environment. Now, another very important element when we look at the future is that we cannot imagine an energy transition without a digital transition. Those who want to have in 30 years' time a good energy transition will not be there if they do not carry out properly their digital transition at the same time. And with all of this, I would like to go back to Algeria, talk again about Algeria, and as Gonzalo said, well, what are the priorities for the government in Algeria? Well, right now, the first priority is to get the maximum value from Algeria's mines, and here we think that conventional projects really have a good opportunity to get benefits and Algeria is publicizing a lot and emphasizing the importance of non-conventional resources. Well, these are also important resources, and we think that's something positive also. And they also want to gain more added value from their commodities. They want to become a project facilitator and a facilities facilitator, not only a commodities producer, and they also consider that renewables are important, especially solar energy. Algeria really has a very high solar capacity and a very low penetration in the markets now. Solar energy, of course, Algeria will have to have remote solar energy projects, but besides that, they have to divert part of the gas consumption through renewables, so that they will have remnants of gas for exports. In Algeria, we can carry out project commitments regarding conventional energies, and which are able to create value for Sonatrach, Cepsa, and Repsol. Then we also have an ambition to become a technological partner. Our projects will have to have a very important digital element, and we will continue to develop this element. And then, although we already are doing interesting things in the field of renewables, for instance, all kinds of renewable energy farms, because as we have seen, by 2030, renewables play an important role. And one of the branches of Mubadala is specialized on renewable energies, and that will allow us to find opportunities in the field of renewables, especially in North Africa and Algeria. Now, a question from Francisco Pablo. As an active part in many associations and organizations, could you tell us what assignments are being carried out in the Euro-Mediterranean area in the field of natural gas especially, and of energy in general? Well, there are several initiatives going on. I'm going to focus on the gas sector, and that's the sector I know well. I think that the most important thing here is the Euro-Mediterranean platform for gas, and this platform was created in 2014 after the summits under the presidency of Malta and Italy of the EU, and the ambition was to create a platform in the Euro-Mediterranean part of the world to be able to offer supply, and little by little they have had to carry out research studies on possible infrastructures, hubs, canal, etc. And this is a platform that manages. The management was transferred to a group that gathers all the Mediterranean countries of the European Union. It kicked off with gas, but there's another platform for electricity and another platform for energy efficiency and renewables. And, well, I'm more familiar with the gas platform, and we contribute to elaborating documentations, especially in the field of infrastructures. But this does not mean that there are not challenges. Of course there are. When we try to prepare something that would be useful for governments and for countries around the Mediterranean Sea, documents that would allow them to work regarding cooperation, for instance. So the elaboration of these documents is sometimes really, really challenging because these documents need to be common and they have to be harmonized, and all the historical elements have to be taken into account. Well, some countries around the Mediterranean Sea really have had some problems which have posed obstacles to the elaboration of these documents, and for that reason the scope of some documents is smaller than what we would have decided. And in a specific case, for instance, when we were asked to analyze the bottlenecks in the structures, well, a very interesting document was carried out. There's an interesting document regarding one country to the north of the Mediterranean. And, well, as I said before, this platform is a structure that allows member states on both sides of the Mediterranean to get together with a documentation on which to base their negotiations, their debates, a substantial documentation that would really offer them substantial information. Well, this is growing at its own pace and it's working as it works, but I think that it is important, besides what Luis said, that it's important to have good bilateral relationships between countries and companies. Well, besides that, it is very important to have a common multilateral platform which is a complementary element to all the other strategies or plans. And then another very interesting initiative related to the to the infrastructure operators. The regulators around the Mediterranean aim at having some transference of technology between the north and the south, and therefore they have asked us to create a structure such as the one we already have for electricity that would allow to transfer network codes or systems from the north to the south of the Mediterranean. Well, let's see what will happen, because sometimes these initiatives work so that those who invest more on them are precisely the northern countries, the countries to the north of the Mediterranean Sea, and we need the southern countries, the countries to the south of the Mediterranean Sea, to be more involved in this strategy, in this plan. But nevertheless, we need to take the most advantage of this platform also. Thank you very much. Now, Juan José Albo, Director for the Regulation in Endesa. How can we mobilize the resources for the energy transition, and what can we learn from past experiences? Hello, good morning, good day. Thank you for this question. Well, it has been said many times already that energy transition requires mobilizing a huge amount of investments. Let's not forget that these investments, to a great extent, affect technologies and systems that yet do not exist or are not mature enough. That is, we will need to accompany our investment schemes with the development of these technologies. We already have some parts of the solution of the decarbonized energy system, wind energy or photovoltaic energies are also very important, but there are other elements that are still lacking, and this element should provide firmity and also flexibility to the system. Sometimes we forget that a kilowatt is cheaper than a kilowatt. A kilowatt of photovoltaic is cheaper than a kilowatt of thermal energy. We've got lots of projects there which are very promising and which are already useful for some solutions like hydrogen or batteries and other devices that will appear or other systems, but some of these solutions are not mature enough and therefore cannot be used at a greater scale. Therefore, in this context, in this technologically uncertain context, one thing is for sure: no matter what we plan, the plans will always be wrong. Another important thing we have to take into account are the mistakes we have made. One of them is that the support scheme for renewables that has been in place in many countries for many countries was very, very incorrect. These were support schemes that really did not have correction elements incorporated to them. Costs would go down, then the support or subvention schemes would not be reviewed, and then corrections were tried to they tried to carry out also corrections, which was really difficult to do. And therefore, since we do know that we are going to make mistakes when we make plans, and we are going to be mistakes when we make forecasts, the mechanisms we are going to implement really need to have correction mechanisms. They have to be adjustable and they have to adapt to changes as they come along. Now, who takes decisions? Who are the decision makers? Not only governments. Governments make political decisions, regulatory decisions, but who makes the investment decisions? Well, investors. And in the current system of distributing generation, decisions are made by the citizens. So the system has to be created so that there is a current framework for decisions that hundreds of thousands or even millions of people have to make, because they are the ones who are going to build the energy transition. There is not a top-down solution. There is not a possibility to decide up there what we have to do. No, this has to be carried out in a decentralized manner and from bottom to top. So what is the basis for all the previous strategies to function? Well, we need to have some price signals that would guide all those entities that have to make decisions for them to be able to make the right decisions. We need a market also that is adapted to the transition, a market that would offer a correct combination of short and long-term signals. For instance, in Europe, the European Commission is not really helping us at all, because the Commission still wants to have a market design that ignores things like firmity or flexibility. And then we need to have a price strategy that uses gas or electricity grids, and it is important to have also correct signs there that would allow the correct development of those infrastructures and the correct use of those infrastructures. Right now, the prices we have are based on the past, and very often they send wrong signals. And then we also need a fiscal system that would also guide decision makers, so that this system would take into account the environmental impacts of different energy sources and fuels and of all the different decisions that we make. Then there are some elements in this fiscal system that, for instance, like the emission rights, that already affects a part of our energy system, but we have to find solutions that would send correct economic signals to diffuse sectors, to transportation, to citizens, to heating, that would limit, for instance, the penalization on electricity in the energy context, and the fact, for instance, that taxes on electricity are just too high and they penalize the use of EVs when we all think that EVs are the future. So in short, we really need economic signals that would show what needs to be kept, how decisions need to be made, because thousands and millions of consumers and producers will need to make decisions. We really need to avoid to base on top-down or frozen systems. Well, that was really interesting. There's a lot of work to do there. Now, Curro from Iberdrola. Iberdrola is going through the energy transition in different regions with different peculiarities in Europe, the UK, Spain, Mexico, Brazil, and the US. What's your experience regarding the energy transitions, and what common elements have you seen in the different legal frameworks? Well, it's true. We have a view over the energy transition in different regions with very different characteristics, different features, but there are some common features, and some of them have been brought about this morning. I think that one common element that Parkinto talked about, for instance, is that we are increasingly aware of the negative consequences of local pollution, and we are aware of the short and long-term risks. So this leads to a consensus on the need to take action and to decarbonize our economies. Another common feature is the rapid reduction of technologies that allow to use clean energies and creating electricity with wind power and with solar power, and the reduction in the price of batteries, which is going very fast also, and which will lead to have cheaper electric vehicles than thermic vehicles. And all of this is creating also a consensus on how to carry out the energy transition. One of the main important vectors is the transition to clean energies, not only because it pollutes less, but also because the electrical use is a lot more efficient than in the field of thermal energy. Another element that has been dealt with this morning is that all of this is being internalized in the private sector, in the financial sector, and in the companies. They're starting to internalize these decisions regarding climate change risks, regarding how to manage these risks, regarding how climate change can impact their investments and their companies and their businesses, and regarding how to develop strategies that would allow to take advantage of all the advantages of the green economy. And finally, I think that this has not been brought up today, which is an equitable transition, a just, a fair transition. Even if we will win in the whole, I think that there can be sectors that could end up being in a disadvantaged position. So we have to take into account these vulnerable sectors who could really be affected negatively by this energy transition. I think that all these factors, all these features are common. But then again, the US, for instance, has a starting point where the emissions are very high, and I think that it is one of the national governments that really does not know where they stand regarding climate change. But on the other hand, the reduction costs of renewables and is leading them to really achieve CO2 emissions reductions, which I think are huge, especially comparing to the expectations we could have had regarding the US some years ago. And Mexico and Brazil are very important economies, growing economies, that are using renewable energies, cheaper renewable energies, in order to be able to create cheap electricity. Mexico is also using renewables in order to be able to remove old, polluting and inefficient ways of creating electricity, and Brazil really has a higher hydroelectrical potential, and it also has a huge capacity as a CO2 capturing country through restoring forests and through creating CO2 capturing systems. And now in Europe, in the EU, we are not going to talk about 85% or 90%. We are going to talk about whether we are going to achieve a carbon neutral economy by 2050. And we are not doing all this because we are more aware, maybe environmentally, but also because we are aware that there are very important economic advantages there. On the one hand, because costs are going down, and on the other hand, because our industry is in a very good position to take advantage of the benefits of the green economy. Some industries are doing that very well, and some other industries are lagging behind. So as a conclusion, I think that we can be optimistic in the sense that there are leverages that we will be able to use. For instance, the reduction of the cost of renewables and batteries, then the political moment and the political drive, for instance, in the US, all these coalitions and alliances are managing that the ball is rolling, and there is an initiative, for instance, that's called Ball is there, and all these universities and centers and entities have committed to reach a two-thirds reduction of emissions of what is agreed in the Paris Agreement, but we cannot sleep on our laurels, because with our current policies we will not reach the 2 degrees centigrade target. If we really want to reach the Paris Agreement targets, we need to take advantage of all these policies, of all these leverages. We need to turn them into specific actions so that we really can achieve our goals. Thank you very much. Now, David Gallardo, from your point of view, what do you think about gas infrastructures and connections between the north of Africa and Spain and Europe? Are the infrastructures enough? Thank you, Rafael, and thank you, Íñigo, for inviting me to this event. Well, this question could be answered very briefly with a yes or a no. Nevertheless, I'm going to try to delve into it a little bit, although I think that the answer is very easy. Now, if we look at the situation from east to west, there is the Maghreb pipe, Medgas, Green Stream, NPL, and also the NPL pipe and the Transmed pipe. So briefly, we would be talking about around 60 BCM, and to this we have to add the liquefied natural gas structures in Algeria, especially Arsour, Skikda, and in the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea in Egypt. So we would be talking now about 30 MBCs in Algeria and around 10 or 12 in Egypt. So adding all of this up, we'll be talking of a very important figure, around 100 BCM, or maybe a little over, depending on the nominal capacity of the pipes. That is 100 BCMs for the supply to southern Europe. Now, if, as Gonzalo said before, if in this formula, if in this equation we take into account also the geopolitical factor, if Algeria, as Luis said, is able to develop a act on hydrocarbons and improves its capacity, then we will go into a deeper and long-term debate. But taking into account the current exports capacity and our current absorbs capacity, Algeria really has an export capacity which is around 45-50 BCM, and domestic consumption is around 40. So together with the 60 I just mentioned, I really think that their existing capacity really is notable for us to be able to face the demand in the near future. Of course, we also have to look at how geopolitically the different actors will be able to develop and to face domestic consumption, how they will be able to export, and how we will be able in Europe to analyze the arrival of different gases and the competitivity of these new gas resources. And maybe this is not right now in the zoom of these infrastructures. But to answer your question, I think that the answer is yes.
Para Pedro Antonio Merino, que es...
Now, Pedro Antonio Merino, he is the chief economist in Repsol. The chief economist in Repsol. Maybe one of the most controversial subjects is how the price of oil will develop. This morning we have seen that it's not easy at all to draw conclusions there. In the midterm, especially if we take into account the different factors we have been analyzing here today. On the one hand, geopolitics, on the other hand, energy transition. And I would like to ask Antonio Merino what he thinks about the evolution, and what other important factors there are when determining such evolution. You have to answer in 5 minutes maximum, and first of all, you should say where prices are going towards and why. Thank you, Rafael and Íñigo. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Lo que ha sido la jornada, y muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much for this answer for this question which has no answer, actually. And now I'm going to give you my opinion. So where are the prices going towards? We don't know. Well, it depends on the sanctions on Iran. In the short term, $82 is the price right now. Nobody could have thought that 6 months ago. And if the success of the sanctions is zero exports from Iran, then in the short term prices will be right where they are right now or even higher. We have to take into account that Iran probably will not have these sanctions, so these sanctions will probably not affect the exports of Iran. Nevertheless, markets have taken into account more or less 1 million, 1.5 million of barrels. Now, talking about geopolitics, we have mentioned tangentially prices in 2018. The determining factor in the prices has not been Iran, but Venezuela. Venezuela has produced 2.6 million barrels 2 years ago, and now it's producing only 1,100,000 barrels. And this has been a surprising factor. And together with what is going to happen in Iran and what is happening regarding sanctions, I think that this is a much more important factor than we could have thought 6 months ago. The data from OPEP is not for the short term, although it really does give those short-term data implicitly in the World OPEC outlook. But we all called it the World Energy Outlook, the WEO. But the official counselor, which is the American agency, reviewed prices, and they are in 73, 74 according to this agency for this year. And for 2019, they have raised the prices to 74, 75. So the outlook has changed, and the short term for 2018 and 19 have been corrected upwards. And there's another important factor that has been tangentially mentioned and which affects the short term, which is the miracle of the Tatoil, the miracle of shale gas or the shale oil. So what's happening there? Well, the increase of shale oil production has faced the problem of available infrastructures, that is pipes to go to the ports. This means that in the short term, the two most important factors we have not talked about is the infrastructures for shale oil and also Iran. So in the short and medium term, let's suppose we could talk about geopolitical risks. It's very hard to foresee anything sure there, but the risks are really huge there. But let's imagine that the risks still are there and that they will be in place still. Another important factor, as we have talked, is the energy transition. One important factor is the speed at which it is evolving, and if the prices of oil are high, then the prices will evolve faster due to a lower demand and due to the competitiveness of new technologies. And So this is another important element. And then transition includes another very important regulatory vector, which is the transition from the point of view of companies. Decisions taken in the companies regarding investing in clean or not clean sectors is important to adapt to what Juan said before. We are going to make mistakes regarding the medium and long term regarding transition. So we have to think that the oil and gas transition will happen. It could happen with the scenario that Barquindo talked about, or it could happen in a faster scenario. Since we cannot make the right decisions, we will have to adapt as events happen. So, in the medium and in the long term, what has not been mentioned regarding this, and which is really important in the industry and that affects prices, I think that the fact that manufacture is separated from production, and production will go down if we do not invest. It is 5 times more to make investments for production than to raise demand, and in this case it is 12 times more important. Therefore, it is important to invest if we want to continue producing the same amount, even if transition goes slower. We need investment for 2 reasons, because companies will make investments if it is profitable, and the General Secretary did not really talk about the companies of the sector, of the oil sector, as compared to the commodities companies. Right now, OPEC is one of the countries that most takes part in the agreements on production. When we carry out a study on what the reality is in the mid and in the long term, and we take into account Russia or other countries that have a large production capacity, well, we can see that the needs regarding prices for them to be sustainable is not 50 or 60, which is the long-term price for the shale oil, but it could be 60 or 70. And I think that with this, the scenery in the mid and long term, it would really show that we would be in 70 or around 80, and maybe in the long term would be around 70, maybe with some spikes. Thank you, Antonio. Now, Margarita, in the European region, the energy transition is being posed with very aggressive attitudes. Not only the reduction of CO2 emissions, but also the reduction of taxes. Nevertheless, the Commission is working in order to interconnect countries not only with electrical cables, but also with oil pipes, with gas pipes. Why? It's true.
Proyectos de interés comunitario.
Commissioner Arias Cañete said, and we have seen, because Estrella Díaz has said clearly, the European Commission has targeted the way for electrification, has marked the way for electrification, and gas there has a very important role in the creation of renewables. And the European Commission has also marked this for gas to continue being the most important fuel where electrification is not possible yet, as for instance in long distance road transport or in sea transport or in some industries where the quality of processes is very important, and gas is able to meet all the high requirements in this respect. So therefore it is very important for the Commission to continue working in interlinking countries in gas pipes, not only to be able to demand the gas demand pipes, so that countries will be able to receive the supplies that they need in a solidary manner. And besides, we are seeing that renewable gas is growing also, and renewable gases will use the existing infrastructures that fortunately in Spain we have already built completely. Therefore, these gas pipes will be storages actually, and at the same time there will be CO2 capturing systems, and capturing systems sinks for methane that is created and generated not only from urban residues, from more urban waste, but also in all these
posterior uso. Y además van a ser
in all these water cleaning plants, and they will also use as storages for renewable energies that cannot be used when there are no peaks. Therefore, the Spanish gas infrastructure is actually quite updated. It will be really important in the future of the energy mix, both in Europe and in Spain. Thank you very much.
Javier de la Fuente, que es Senior Sales Manager de Power and Gas Division de Siemens. Desde el punto de vista tecnológico, ¿estamos preparados para esta transición energética? Y añado, teniendo en cuenta que algunas de estas tecnologías de las que estamos hablando hoy no las conocemos, no están desarrolladas plenamente.
Muchas gracias. Yo creo que no estamos preparados para el escenario final, pero sí estamos preparados para la transición, ¿no? Tenemos muchas tecnologías ya y estamos invirtiendo todos los años más y más en desarrollarlas para dar pasos hacia ese futuro, ¿no?, libre de emisiones. Siguiendo con lo que comentaba Marta del gas, seguimos viendo el gas como una energía de transición, una energía que se está usando ya para sustituir otras energías más contaminantes. Estamos viendo, por ejemplo, China, que está apostando, a la vez que apuesta por renovables, está aumentando su capacidad de generación con gas, con el objetivo claro de eliminar polución. También otro, como comentaba Marta, como es el sistema de respaldo a redes cada vez con más renovables. Y ahí, ¿cómo va la tecnología? ¿Cómo está evolucionando la tecnología de gas? Básicamente en ganar flexibilidad. Si vemos los nuevos desarrollos de máquinas que operan con gas natural, son máquinas que son igualmente capaces de trabajar en un ciclo combinado de alta eficiencia al 63%, y esa misma turbina de gas es capaz de trabajar como picker, haciendo arranques y paradas muy rápidos y dando otro tipo de servicios a la red que cada vez cobra más importancia, sobre todo en mercados maduros donde las renovables copan una cuota muy grande ya, y hace falta servicios de soporte a la frecuencia y otro tipo de soportes a la red. Si vamos también, otra de las consecuencias de las renovables, como estamos viendo, aparte del respaldo, pues es también, ¿no?, una capacidad de almacenamiento. Aparte de las baterías.
Besides the backup would be the availability to store renewables. There are some sectors or some places where other technology niches could take place. We have been talking about the Middle East and about North Africa, and we have seen recently that these regions are having thermosolar projects. For instance, in Morocco, there is this interesting thermosolar hybrid project. The photovoltaic energy will allow us to cover a demand peak, but for instance during the day, but it will not be able to meet that peak in the afternoon or in the evening. So what possible solutions are there? Well, solar energy during the day and thermal for the night, so that it will be able to deliver that power when the sun goes down, and it could continue producing additional solar energy for 5-6 hours. We have talked about hydrogen also. Would a renewable hydrogen energy source work or not? We don't know yet. It seems that it will become competitive over time, but the technology already exists, and we are using it to use residual gases in refineries. And right now our gas turbines are using already around 60% of hydrogen. We are going to carry out 80% tests this year, and soon we will be carrying out tests for 100%, which, since hydrogen could at the end of the day be a clean energy and an unextinguishable energy. And finally, there is an important layer that could cover any region and any technology and any energy, which is digitalization, which is changing the way we consume and produce energy, and it is changing the way we design machinery and facilities to produce energy. And that is another very important factor we have to take into account, and we really have to think that growth will be exponential there. Thank you. And finally, Francisco Rodriguez, Director for Regulation and Corporate Issues regarding risks. What is the role of the distribution system in the energy transition? Thank you, Íñigo, very much, and thank you for inviting me. Well, we are very much used to looking at the energy transition as a decarbonization process, and we are forgetting infrastructures very often, which play a very important role also. If we look at the three main axes around which plans revolve, or this energy transition revolves, which is the introduction of changes in the mix, then the electrification of demand, and the introduction of energy efficiency and systems as self-consumption or self-production. And beyond all, under all of that, we have the infrastructures and the distribution grids. It is difficult to carry out an energy transition, for instance, in Spain, of 3-5 gigabytes per year by 2030 from renewables if we do not have a correct plan for infrastructures, of electrical infrastructures, and if there is not an appropriate growth in investments and digitalization of the grids. It will be difficult to electrify the demand and absorb the growth of demands, but also absorb the shift from other energies to the electrical sector if we do not improve the efficiency of the distribution grids. And we will not be able to introduce self-consumption and storage if we do not update all these grids and all these distribution mechanisms. And I think that distributors will have a very important role, first of all, in planning and in anticipating, so that we will not make huge mistakes regarding investments, and above all regarding innovation. And when we talk about innovation, we are talking about digitalization, about automation, about grids that will have to be designed in a very different manner from how they were designed in the past. We are actually already doing that with huge two-way energy flows, but I think there are two very important elements to take into account. First of all of this has to be geared towards giving a better service to the customers, not only making our costs more efficiency, but we really have to improve customer experience through distributing in a more efficient manner. And secondly, we have to focus also on what we have focused already, but in a different manner. We will not be able to continue distributing if renewables will invade the market. And forgive me if I'm going to give you examples from a very high level, taking into account, for instance, smart counters. If we take into account smart counters, well, this does not allow only for reducing distribution costs, because we distributors do not have to go and measure what consumers have consumed, but this will also improve consumer experience, because they will be able to change power degrees in minutes. It will allow them to have access to their consumption curves, and so they will be able to change from one consumption model to another one very swiftly. And we will not be able to continue functioning as we have so far done. 3 or 5 gigawatts from renewables will not be possible if our distribution and innovation grids and networks are not correct. So what are we doing right now? We are using the advantages of wind energy very often, but when there's a lot of wind energy, also our distribution networks can collapse, but we should be able to freeze also our distribution networks, and we should be able to improve their capacity, doubling actually their capacities. So without using more copper and without creating or building more networks, only by making our existing networks more efficient, we will really be able to make a huge leap. Now, the maintenance of these distribution networks will require a lot more work. For instance, a part in northern Spain where the wind energy also has a very large share, one of the main factors for costs going up is felling trees. We have lots of electric lines. There's a lot of trees. There has been an intense activity of felling trees. So felling trees is carried out with standard contracts, usually every 4 years. All the streets where our lines go, well, all the trees along the streets are pruned and are maintained every year, and these affect our electrical lines. And we have been able to identify what kinds of trees grow in every street, whether they grow fast or slow, and we are able to differentiate absolutely the effect of felling and pruning trees on our distribution capacities. So this will allow us to optimize distribution costs, and it will allow us to have a smaller impact on the environment, and also we will allow consumers to have a better experience, because consumers are not only consumers, but they will also be producers, and they will also be important elements in these distribution networks. I think they will import an important role in the transition, and we distributors will have to adapt through anticipation and through adjustments and through a very good planning. Thank you very much, Francisca, and now we could really conclude our session. Thank you very much, Rafael. Thank you to all the participants, and I would like to apologize as coordinator for having not finished at the time that was programmed. And but there were very many interesting questions which had to be posed. Thank you very much to all of you.